Most people believe that sales is the art of persuasion. They imagine the best salespeople as master manipulators, individuals who can talk anyone into buying anything. But this belief reveals a fundamental misunderstanding about how influence actually works. The truth is that the most successful people in sales rarely spend their time persuading anyone. Instead, they focus on positioning, and the difference between the two is enormous. Persuasion happens when you are trying to convince someone that you are the right choice. Positioning happens when people arrive at that conclusion before you even begin speaking. Think about the most respected brands in the world. When someone walks into an Apple store, they are not looking for reasons to trust Apple. That trust was established long before they entered the building. The positioning was already done. The sale becomes a formality. The same principle applies to people. Weak salespeople spend their energy arguing, explaining, defending, justifying. They enter every conversation hoping to change someone's mind. Powerful salespeople do something different. They shape the frame before the conversation even begins, because human beings hate being persuaded. The moment people feel pressure, they instinctively resist. Psychologists call this psychological reactance. When someone feels their freedom of choice is being threatened, they become more committed to their original position, even if it works against their own interests. This is why many sales pitches fail. The seller pushes harder. The buyer pulls away. The seller explains more. The buyer becomes more skeptical. The harder the seller tries to persuade, the stronger the resistance becomes. But positioning changes everything. Instead of saying, "Let me convince you why I'm valuable," positioning says, "Let me show you why people like you consistently choose this." Instead of chasing approval, positioning creates certainty. And certainty is one of the most powerful forces in human behavior. People are drawn to confidence, not arrogance, not loudness, certainty, because uncertainty creates anxiety, and human beings naturally move toward individuals who reduce uncertainty. This is why authority often sells more effectively than logic. A confident expert with average arguments will frequently outperform an uncertain expert with superior arguments. Not because people are irrational, but because trust is emotional before it becomes logical. The strongest salespeople understand this deeply. They don't focus on closing deals. They focus on becoming the obvious choice. They build credibility. They establish authority. They create proof. They develop a reputation. And once that foundation exists, selling becomes easier because the decision has already been made in the buyer's mind. The conversation is no longer about convincing, it is about confirming. This principle extends far beyond business. It applies to leadership, relationships, negotiations, influence, and even personal success. The people who constantly seek validation often struggle to gain influence. The people who quietly build value eventually become difficult to ignore, because in every area of life, the same rule applies. The strongest position is not the ability to persuade. The strongest position is becoming the choice that requires the least persuasion. Weak people chase approval. Powerful people create certainty. And once you understand that distinction, you'll never look at sales or influence the same way again. Why do some people command respect the moment they walk into a room? Before they speak, before they explain their credentials, before anyone knows what they've accomplished. Why does one person instantly capture attention while another struggles to be taken seriously, even when they possess more knowledge? The answer reveals something profound about human nature. Authority is felt before it is explained. Most people assume influence comes from having the best arguments, the strongest evidence, the most impressive achievements. But human beings rarely work that way. Long before we evaluate logic, we evaluate signals, confidence, composure, certainty, presence. Within seconds of meeting someone, our brains begin making unconscious judgments. Can this person be trusted? Should I follow their lead? Do they seem competent? Do they seem certain? And these judgments often happen before a single meaningful word is spoken. This is because authority is not purely intellectual. It is psychological. In ancient environments, humans had to make rapid decisions about who to trust, who to follow, and who represented a threat. There was no time for lengthy analysis. The brain learned to rely on signals. And even in the modern world, that ancient programming still influences our decisions. Think about two experts standing side by side. One speaks with hesitation, constantly second-guesses themselves, qualifies every statement, appears uncertain. The other speaks calmly, moves deliberately, maintains emotional control, projects conviction. Even if both possess the same level of knowledge, most people will naturally trust the second person more. Not because their arguments are better, but because certainty itself is persuasive. This doesn't mean confidence is always correct. History is filled with confident people who were completely wrong. But confidence creates belief long before facts are evaluated, and belief shapes perception. That is why authority often outperforms logic. People don't simply follow information, they follow signals. The strongest leaders understand this. They know that influence begins before the conversation starts. Their appearance communicates discipline. Their posture communicates self-respect. Their voice communicates stability. Their behavior communicates certainty. Every signal reinforces the same message. I know where I'm going. And human beings are naturally drawn to those who appear to know the way. This principle extends far beyond leadership. It affects business, sales, negotiations, relationships, and personal success. Many talented individuals remain overlooked because they assume competence speaks for itself. But competence hidden behind uncertainty often goes unnoticed. Meanwhile, individuals with less knowledge but greater conviction attract opportunities, followers, and influence. The lesson is not to become arrogant. The lesson is to become aligned. When your knowledge, actions, body language, and beliefs all communicate the same message, people sense it immediately. Because true authority is not something you announce, it is something others feel, long before you explain it. And perhaps that is the most uncomfortable truth of all. People rarely judge you by what you know first. They judge you by the signals that suggest whether you know what you're doing. The explanation comes later. The feeling comes first. And in a world driven by perception, that difference changes everything. Why do people spend $10 on a watch that tells time no better than a $10 watch? Why do they pay luxury prices for products that have cheaper alternatives? Why do millions of people buy things they don't actually need? The answer has very little to do with the product itself. Because people don't buy products. They buy a new identity. Most people believe purchasing decisions are rational. They assume consumers compare features, analyze benefits, and choose the option that makes the most sense. But human behavior tells a different story. People rarely buy what something does. They buy what it says about them. Think about it. Nobody buys a luxury car because it has 4 wheels. Nobody buys a Rolex because they need to know the time. Nobody joins an expensive gym because exercise is impossible elsewhere. What they're really buying is a story about who they are, or more importantly, who they want to become. Every purchase is an identity decision, disguised as a financial decision. The entrepreneur buying a luxury watch isn't purchasing metal and glass. He's buying the feeling of success. The student purchasing an elite education isn't just buying information. She's buying a future version of herself. The person joining a fitness program isn't paying for workouts. They're investing in a new identity, someone healthier, stronger, and more disciplined. This is why products alone rarely create demand. Identity creates demand. Human beings are constantly trying to close the gap between who they are today and who they hope to become tomorrow. And the marketplace understands this better than most people realize. The world's most successful brands don't sell products. They sell transformation. Nike doesn't sell shoes. It sells the identity of an athlete. Luxury brands don't sell handbags. They sell status. High-end universities don't sell education. They sell prestige, opportunity, and belonging. The product is simply the vehicle. The identity is the destination. And this principle extends far beyond consumer behavior. It influences careers, relationships, politics, leadership, and even personal success. People are naturally attracted to anything that helps them become a better version of themselves. This is why logic often loses to emotion. A product can make sense and still fail. Another product can be objectively inferior and become wildly successful, because decisions are rarely made by logic alone. They are driven by desire, and desire is rooted in identity. The most powerful communicators understand this. They don't ask, "How do I sell this product?" They ask, "Who does this allow someone to become?" Because when people see a better future version of themselves, resistance begins to disappear. They stop evaluating, they start imagining, and imagination is one of the strongest forces in human behavior. The uncomfortable truth is that most purchases are not about ownership. They are about aspiration. People buy symbols, stories, possibilities, versions of themselves that do not yet exist. Which is why the greatest products in history were never really about the products at all. They were about transformation. The world belongs to those who understand this, because products solve problems. But identity creates decisions, and the moment you understand that distinction, you'll never look at money, marketing, or human behavior the same way again. Why do people stay in jobs they hate for years? Why do they remain in unhealthy relationships long after they know they should leave? Why do they delay investing, starting a business, or changing their lives even when they know exactly what they need to do? Most people believe human beings are motivated by rewards, the promise of success, the possibility of wealth, the excitement of a better future. But human nature tells a very different story. People move faster away from pain than toward pleasure. In fact, one of the most powerful discoveries in behavioral psychology is that the fear of losing something is often far stronger than the desire to gain something. Think about it. Imagine someone offers you a chance to make an extra $1,000. You would probably be interested. Now imagine someone tells you that if you do nothing, you will lose $1,000. The emotional reaction is completely different. Suddenly, the situation feels urgent. The same amount of money is involved, but one scenario creates desire, the other creates action, and action is what changes lives. This is why so many people tolerate mediocre situations for years, not because they enjoy them, but because the pain of change has not yet become greater than the pain of staying the same. The employee remains in a job they hate until the stress becomes unbearable. The entrepreneur delays taking action until financial pressure forces a decision. The investor waits until inflation has already eroded years of savings. The pattern repeats everywhere. People rarely act when they see an opportunity. They act when they feel a consequence. And perhaps nowhere is this more visible than in the world of money. Most people know they should save. Most people know they should invest. Most people know they should avoid unnecessary debt. Yet knowledge alone rarely creates behavior. What changes behavior is the realization of what inaction will cost, the future they may lose, the freedom they may never have, the opportunities that quietly disappear while they wait. This principle explains why powerful communicators rarely focus only on benefits. They focus on consequences. They don't simply show people what they can gain. They reveal what they stand to lose. Because loss captures attention in a way that rewards rarely can. The wealthy understand this better than most. They don't just think about how much money an investment might make. They think about the cost of doing nothing, the years of growth they might miss, the opportunities that may never return, the freedom delayed by indecision. And that shift changes everything. The poor ask, "What if this doesn't work?" The wealthy ask, "What if I never start?" One question creates fear, the other creates urgency. And urgency is one of the most valuable forces in success. The uncomfortable truth is that most people are not held back by a lack of information. They are held back by a lack of emotional pressure. They know what to do. They simply don't feel compelled to do it yet. Until one day, the cost of waiting becomes impossible to ignore. By then, years may have passed, opportunities may have vanished, and the price of inaction may be far greater than the risk they were trying to avoid. Because human beings rarely move when they see pleasure in the distance. They move when they feel pain getting closer. And those who understand this hidden law of human nature gain an enormous advantage not only in business and influence, but in life itself. The greatest opportunities are often seized by those who learn to act before pain forces them to. Because waiting for discomfort to become unbearable is not strategy, it is surrender. And the people who build wealth, power, and freedom are usually the ones who move before they are forced to. Why do people want what they can't have? Why does a sold-out product suddenly become more desirable? Why does a luxury brand become more attractive when it raises its prices? Why do the most influential people often seem the hardest to reach? The answer lies in one of the oldest laws of human nature. Scarcity creates power. Most people spend their lives trying to become more available, more responsive, more accommodating, more eager to please. They believe accessibility creates opportunity. But in reality, unlimited accessibility often destroys value. Human beings are wired to associate rarity with importance. When something is everywhere, we stop noticing it. When something becomes difficult to obtain, our attention immediately increases. Not because the thing itself changed, but because its scarcity changed our perception. This principle governs far more than products. It governs status, influence, authority, and power itself. Think about the world's most respected institutions. Elite universities accept only a fraction of applicants. Luxury brands intentionally limit supply. Exclusive clubs restrict membership. The goal is not exclusion for its own sake. The goal is perceived value. Because people instinctively assume that if access is limited, there must be something worth protecting. The same rule applies to individuals. People who desperately seek approval often lose influence. People who constantly chase opportunities often appear less valuable. People who make themselves available to everyone rarely become indispensable to anyone. Why? Because scarcity signals confidence. It communicates that your time has value, your attention has value, your energy has value, and value attracts attention. This is why desperation is one of the fastest ways to lose power. The salesperson who needs the deal, the employee who constantly seeks validation, the entrepreneur who lowers their standards for every opportunity. All of them send the same hidden message: I need this more than you do. And the moment that message is communicated, leverage disappears. The balance of power shifts. The person who needs less gains more control. This is why the most powerful negotiators are often willing to walk away, not because they don't care, but because they are not dependent. And independence creates authority. The wealthy understand this principle instinctively. They don't chase every opportunity. They choose carefully. They understand that saying yes to everything weakens focus. And focus is one of the rarest forms of power in the modern world. The truth is that scarcity is not about pretending to be unavailable. It is about becoming valuable enough that your time genuinely becomes limited. Because there is a difference between artificial scarcity and earned scarcity. Artificial scarcity is manipulation. Earned scarcity is the natural result of value. The more useful, capable, and effective you become, the more selective you must be, not to impress others, but to protect what matters. In the end, power does not come from controlling people. It comes from controlling access. Access to your time, access to your attention, access to your expertise, access to your opportunities. Because what everyone can have becomes ordinary. But what few can access becomes desirable. And in a world where attention is the most valuable currency, scarcity transforms attention into influence, influence into leverage, and leverage into power. That is why the strongest people rarely chase. They become valuable enough to be chosen. And once that happens, scarcity stops being a strategy. It becomes a consequence of your value. Why are so many people afraid of rejection? Why do talented individuals stay silent in meetings? Why do entrepreneurs delay launching their businesses? Why do people avoid asking for opportunities they desperately want? The answer is surprisingly simple. Most people believe rejection means failure. But what if rejection was never failure in the first place? What if rejection was simply information? Think about it. A child learns to walk by falling. An athlete improves through mistakes. A scientist advances through failed experiments. In almost every area of life, failure is accepted as part of learning. Yet when it comes to social rejection, business rejection, or personal rejection, people suddenly treat it differently. They interpret rejection as a verdict on their worth, a judgment of their intelligence, their value, their potential, their future. And that is where the real problem begins. Because rejection rarely tells you who you are. It tells you something about the situation, the timing, the offer, the communication, the fit. But most people make a critical mistake. They convert feedback into identity. Instead of thinking, "This approach didn't work," they think, "I am not good enough." And once that happens, growth stops. Human nature is wired to avoid social pain. Thousands of years ago, being rejected by your tribe could threaten your survival. Acceptance meant safety. Rejection meant danger. Even though the modern world has changed, our psychology has not. The brain still reacts to rejection as if it were a threat. This is why rejection feels so personal. But the most successful people see it differently. Elite performers understand something that average people never learn. Rejection is data, nothing more, nothing less. Every no contains information. Information about what is missing, what is unclear, what is not yet valuable enough, what needs improvement. And information is power. Think about the world's greatest entrepreneurs, the most successful investors, the highest performing salespeople, the most influential leaders. None of them avoided rejection. They encountered it constantly. The difference is that they never treated rejection as evidence of limitation. They treated it as evidence of direction, a map showing them what to adjust next. This is why rejection often becomes a hidden advantage. While others retreat after hearing no, powerful people become curious. They ask questions, they analyze, they adapt. And every rejection makes them stronger. Because every rejection removes uncertainty. Every rejection reveals reality. Every rejection provides information that success can be built upon. The uncomfortable truth is that many people fail not because they are rejected too often. They fail because they stop after the first rejection. They assume the answer is permanent. They mistake a temporary response for a permanent reality. But life rarely works that way. A rejected proposal can become a successful business. A rejected applicant can become an industry leader. A rejected idea can eventually change the world. History is filled with examples of people who succeeded because they refused to let rejection define them. They understood that rejection is not a stop sign. It is a signal telling you what the market values, what people need, what still requires refinement. And those who learn to read that signal gain a tremendous advantage. Because every person wants success. Very few are willing to collect the information required to achieve it. The powerful are. That is why they continue moving when others quit. That is why they keep asking when others become silent. And that is why rejection often becomes the dividing line between those who dream about success and those who eventually achieve it. Because rejection is not failure. Failure is refusing to learn from it. And the moment you understand that distinction, every no becomes one step closer to the right yes. Why do some people instantly earn trust while others struggle to convince anyone? Why do certain leaders inspire confidence before they even prove themselves? Why can two people present the exact same idea, yet one is believed while the other is ignored? The answer has very little to do with the idea itself. It has everything to do with the person delivering it. Before you can sell a product, a service, a vision, or an opportunity, you must first sell yourself. Because people don't buy what you say, they buy what they believe about you. Most people assume confidence is something you're born with, a natural gift possessed by a lucky few. But confidence is rarely innate. It is built, it is earned, and most importantly, it is communicated. Think about it. If you don't fully believe in your own value, how can you expect someone else to? If you hesitate when speaking about your abilities, why should others trust them? If you constantly seek validation, why would people see you as a source of certainty? Human beings are remarkably sensitive to inconsistency. We notice hesitation. We detect doubt. We sense uncertainty, even when it is never spoken aloud. And once doubt enters the conversation, influence begins to disappear. Because trust is contagious. But so is uncertainty. This is why the first sale always happens internally. long before a customer buys your product, long before an employer hires you, long before an audience follows you. You must convince yourself, not through positive thinking, not through empty affirmations, but through evidence, real evidence, promises kept, skills developed, challenges overcome, discipline maintained when nobody was watching. True self-belief is not built from optimism. It is built from proof. Every time you keep a commitment to yourself, you strengthen trust. Every time you break one, you weaken it. And over time, these small decisions create an internal reputation. A reputation that determines how much authority you carry into every room. The most influential people understand this. They don't rely on motivation. They rely on self-trust. Because motivation changes with circumstances. Self-trust remains. When obstacles appear, they don't ask whether they are capable. They already know. Not because they are special, but because they have repeatedly demonstrated competence to themselves. This is what most people misunderstand about charisma. Charisma is not simply being likable. Charisma is certainty. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are and what you can do. And certainty is magnetic. People naturally move toward those who appear grounded in themselves, especially in a world filled with confusion and doubt. That is why authority always begins within. The strongest negotiators trust themselves. The strongest leaders trust themselves. The strongest entrepreneurs trust themselves, not blindly, not arrogantly, but because they have built a foundation that makes trust rational. The uncomfortable truth is that many people spend years trying to convince others of their value while secretly questioning it themselves. And that contradiction is visible. People can feel it. They may not know why, but they sense it. Because confidence is not something you announce, it is something you transmit. And what you transmit is determined by what you truly believe. So before you try to sell an idea, ask yourself a harder question. Have you sold it to yourself? Before you ask others to trust your vision, ask whether you trust it. Before you ask others to believe in your potential, ask whether you have earned belief in your own mind. Because every form of influence begins in the same place. The first person you must convince is yourself. And once that happens, convincing others becomes dramatically easier. Not because your words changed, but because you did. The world is full of people trying to sell products. Very few have learned to sell the person behind the product. And that is often the difference between being heard and being ignored, between being followed and being doubted, between having an opportunity and creating one. Because before people buy what you offer, they buy the version of you standing in front of them. Why do some people become nervous the moment a conversation goes quiet? Why do they rush to explain themselves, fill every pause, defend every statement, answer questions nobody even asked? The reason reveals something fascinating about human nature. Most people are terrified of silence, and because they are uncomfortable with it, they unknowingly give away power. Silence is one of the few tools that becomes stronger the less you use it. Yet most people never learn how to wield it. They assume influence comes from speaking more, explaining more, arguing more, persuading more. But in reality, some of the most powerful moments in any conversation happen when nothing is said at all. Think about it. Imagine two people negotiating. One makes an offer. The other immediately begins talking, explaining, justifying, defending. The silence makes them uncomfortable, so they rush to fill it. Without realizing it, they reveal information. They expose insecurity. They weaken their position. Now imagine the opposite. The offer is made. And then, silence. No explanation. No nervous laughter. No attempt to rescue the moment. Just calm stillness. Suddenly the dynamic changes. The other person begins talking. They feel pressure. They start explaining, negotiating against themselves, trying to fill the space. Because silence creates psychological tension, and human beings are naturally driven to resolve tension. This is why silence is so powerful. It transfers emotional pressure from you to the other person. Most people think power comes from controlling words, but true power often comes from controlling reactions. And silence is one of the clearest signs of emotional control. Anyone can speak when emotions are high, Few people can remain composed. Anyone can react. Few people can observe. Anyone can defend themselves. Few people can allow uncertainty to exist without immediately trying to eliminate it. This is why silence has always been associated with authority. The strongest leaders rarely feel the need to speak first. The most respected individuals rarely rush to justify themselves. The most confident people rarely feel compelled to win every argument, because confidence does not seek constant validation. Insecurity does. Human beings instinctively interpret emotional restraint as strength, not always correctly, but consistently. When someone remains calm under pressure, we assume they possess certainty. When someone reacts immediately, we often assume the opposite. This principle extends far beyond negotiations. It affects leadership, relationships, business, sales, and social status. The person who can tolerate silence gains access to information others miss. They hear what people reveal when they become uncomfortable. They notice what people expose when they feel pressure. And information is leverage. The uncomfortable truth is that many people talk too much because they fear being misunderstood. They fear appearing weak. They fear losing control. But in trying to control perception, they often create the very impression they hope to avoid. The powerful understand something different. Not every accusation deserves a response. Not every challenge deserves a defense. Not every opinion deserves attention. Sometimes silence communicates confidence more effectively than words ever could, because silence sends a message that cannot be faked easily. It says, "I am comfortable enough with myself that I do not need to react." And that message carries enormous weight. In a world where everyone is competing to be heard, silence becomes increasingly rare. And like all rare things, it becomes valuable. The strongest person in the room is not always the loudest. It is often the one who remains calm while everyone else is rushing to speak, because words can create influence. But silence reveals power, and those who master silence often discover something extraordinary. The less they feel compelled to speak, the more people begin listening when they finally do. Why do some people seem to get lucky over and over again? Why do opportunities appear to find them? Why do certain individuals consistently rise while others spend years waiting for their breakthrough? Most people believe the answer is timing, connections, luck, or circumstances, but there is a deeper truth hiding beneath the surface. The rich practice while others hope, and that single difference changes everything. Hope is comforting. It requires no effort, no sacrifice, no preparation. You simply believe that someday the right opportunity will appear. The right person will notice you. The right investment will come along. The right moment will arrive. And until then, you wait. Millions of people spend years living this way, waiting for motivation, waiting for confidence, waiting for permission, waiting for life to change. But the wealthy understand something most people never learn. Opportunities do not create competence. Competence attracts opportunities. Long before success becomes visible, preparation happens in private. The investor studies while others speculate. The entrepreneur learns while others complain. The leader develops skills while others chase shortcuts. And when opportunity finally appears, outsiders call it luck. But what they are witnessing is preparation meeting timing. Human nature is biased toward immediate rewards. We are naturally drawn to comfort, entertainment, distraction, instant gratification. The brain prefers pleasure today over benefits tomorrow. This is why most people struggle to practice consistently. The rewards are invisible, the progress feels slow, the results seem distant. Yet nearly every form of wealth follows the same pattern. Small actions repeated over long periods create extraordinary outcomes. The rich understand compounding, not just in money, but in skills, knowledge, relationships, reputation, confidence. Every hour invested compounds. Every lesson learned compounds. Every difficult conversation compounds. Every repetition compounds. Meanwhile, the average person hopes for a breakthrough. The wealthy build toward one. This is why the gap between successful people and unsuccessful people often appears larger than it really is. The difference is rarely talent. It is rarely intelligence. It is usually consistency. One person waits until they feel ready. The other practices until they become ready. One hopes for confidence. The other earns confidence through repetition. One dreams about the future. The other prepares for it. And preparation creates a hidden form of power. Because when opportunities arrive, prepared people move quickly. Unprepared people hesitate. Prepared people recognize value. Unprepared people miss it. Prepared people act with certainty. Unprepared people wait for more information. And in many cases, that hesitation becomes the difference between success and regret. The uncomfortable truth is that most people overestimate the importance of opportunity and underestimate the importance of preparation. They assume successful individuals had access to something special, but often the real advantage was far simpler. They practiced when nobody was watching. They improved when there was no reward. They stayed disciplined when progress was invisible. And over time, those small advantages became impossible to ignore. This is why wealth is rarely created by a single decision. It is created by thousands of small decisions made long before the payoff arrives. The rich understand this. They do not rely on motivation. They do not rely on hope. They rely on systems, habits, repetition, because they know something most people never discover. Hope can inspire action, but practice creates results, and results create leverage. In the end, the world rewards those who are prepared long before they are recognized, because success rarely belongs to the person who wanted it most. It belongs to the person who prepared for it longest. The crowd waits for opportunity. The powerful train for it. And when opportunity finally arrives, it appears as if they were lucky. But luck had very little to do with it. They were simply ready when everyone else was still hoping.